We are a relatively small company in terms of our population. It's 1,300 employees. However, the company I used to work for, which was about 13,000 employees, is almost in parallel in terms of complexity, because even though I have 1,300 employees, I have them spread across 30 plus countries. Right? So when I deploy systems, it has to work equally well in Italy as it does in Brazil, as it does in China, as it does in Singapore. So I have to service employees of the world. And one of the things that I'm sure most of you relate to is having one employee in Brazil is sometimes as difficult as having 100 employees in Brazil. You still have to set up Brazil. Doesn't matter how many people are there. So geographical complexity, even though we're a relatively small organization, is a feature of what we have to deal with. We are based in primarily Europe, China, you can see. And we have big manufacturing centers in Singapore, China, and believe it or not, Israel, right? So you may say, why Israel? Because part of our strategy as a business is growing through M&A, and one of the things we did was buy an Israeli technology company, which is a leader in that space. That is a recurrent theme in terms of how we're going to grow as a business, and that creates some very, very specific, and I'll talk to it later, in terms of how that affects how I think about the infrastructure, the architecture, and what I do from a HR systems point of view, because M&A is a feature of how we're going to grow. Widely distributed sales offices, including in multiple cities in multiple countries, mix of cultures, language, and background. And historically, as an organization, we've been regionally focused, but a big part of the push in the organization is to go global and to really enable global functions and global capabilities. And we'll talk more about that later on. Okay? As I said, we are a successful startup, but we're like a teenager who now needs to grow up. You know, we have had disparate organizations. A lot of our strategy was to go to a market and just sell as much as you can. Right? The markets are maturing. We have much more complex organizations. We need to be now more systematic and process-oriented in terms of how we manage, because you get it wrong in a market, you can mess up the business, right? Whereas before, we were just chasing growth, right? We need to align activities and people, right? That's critical for us. And it's not something that historically we've been good at, right? Because all we did was go out there and sell as much as we can, right? Now we have to be much more focused, because we can't afford to fund and resource growing everywhere all at the same time. We have to start making choices. And if we're going to get good at M&A, we also have to be more organized in terms of how we integrate and run collective activities. Okay? Big part of it is maximizing performance, right? We face an environment where prices are under pressure. Anybody face that environment? Prices are under pressure. How do you maximize revenues? The good news for us is that generally the markets are still growing volume-wise, right? So there's growth in the markets. So it's better than being in shrinking markets with price under pressure. But you still have to make sure you're doing the right things. How do we make sure that our people are focused on the right things so we can maximize the performance? And as I said, M&A is a big feature of what we need to do, right? So how do we make sure that the company and HR is M&A ready, okay? And then, of course, building a culture of excellence, right? You notice there's nothing in there about shared services. There's nothing in there about outsourcing. There's nothing. All of those things are discussions and considerations, but they are discussions and considerations because of outcomes that we're trying to drive, right? So it's very important we understand the outcomes, and then the activities that we do are based around delivering those outcomes.